Hello, everyone. It's 1 o'clock now, so we will get started with our webinar. Just wanted to welcome everyone and also thank you for attending this webinar, which is going to provide you with more information on our Class 1 Learning Pathway Grant Program, and specifically the Employment Pathway Grant Stream. My name is Lindsay Ann Frere, and I'm an Acting Executive Director with the Traffic Safety Services Division of the Ministry of Transportation and Economic Corridors. I'll be joined later today by Alexandra Bennett, Acting Director of Strategic Initiatives, to help answer any questions you may have. On the back end, we're also joined by the program team from MNP LLP, who will be administering the program on behalf of the ministry. As many of you already know, the new Class 1 Learning Pathway was launched April 1st, 2025, with 2 new grant funding streams. Our second grant funding stream, which was presented in a separate webinar, is called the Industry Advancement Grant and provides funding to organizations for initiatives that enhance Class 1 and Class 3 driver recruitment, training, and retention in Alberta's commercial transportation industry. So here's a bit of what we'll cover today. We'll go through the background information of the Employment Pathway Grant. We'll provide an overview of the grant program goals. We'll provide information on who is eligible for the Employment Pathway Grant. We'll provide an overview of the various funding categories and the funding terms. And finally, we'll run through the application process and show you some screenshots of the grant portal that we'll be launching later today. We've also enabled the Q&A function in this webinar where you can ask questions throughout. We'll go through all of your questions following the formal presentation. You can also send your questions to us after this webinar at the email address located on this slide, programadmin@learningpathwaygrant.ca. The Employment Pathway Grant will offer funding to employers in the commercial transportation sector for workforce investment and training of new drivers. This initiative aims to boost workforce participation, enhance retention, and promote professional growth for Class 1 drivers. The program aims to address critical challenges in the driving industry by focusing on 3 key goals: expand the pool of future drivers and generate interest in the industry, boost driver retention through employer support and professional development opportunities, and provide industry-specific training for new and future drivers. This is an employer-driven grant, which means that the primary application must be submitted by the employer and must include current and/or future employees of the employer. An eligible employer applicant must be a private business, including sole proprietors, general and limited partnerships and corporations, nonprofit organizations, or a First Nations and Métis settlement. In addition, all employers must be established in Alberta for at least 1 year and must be in good standing with the province. Please note that employees cannot apply directly to this program. Now let's look into who would be considered an eligible employee or future employee under this grant. Eligible employees or future employees must have an established employment relationship with the employer who is applying for the grant. This means that they either need to be currently employed or have a job offer from the employer. The employee must be legally allowed to work in Canada and be a resident of Alberta. Next, the employee needs to meet the requirements for a Class 1 driver's license. This includes holding a valid Alberta non-probationary or Class 1 license. It's important to note that employees that have previously received funding for Class 1 driver training from any Alberta government program will not be eligible for additional funding under this grant. Applicants can request funding under 1 or all 3 funding categories seen here for each employee or future employee. The Class 1 training reimbursement category offers up to $10,000 to cover training costs for new drivers. including up to $700 for classroom entry training support if required. As many of you know, the entry learning in our new Class 1 learning pathway can be done online. Those online training fees would not be eligible. It could also offer up to $6,800 for core learning, up to $2,500 for competence building, and up to $4,000 for the experience and equivalency program. It's important to note that the training provider must be separate and distinct from the employer applicant. Additionally, there's an onboarding incentive of $10,000 aimed at encouraging the hiring of new Class 1 drivers with less than 2 years of experience, provided they remain employed for at least 90 days. This helps in attracting talent and supports retention. Lastly, the professional development reimbursement allows for up to $5,000 for advanced training, which is essential for licensed drivers looking to enhance their skills and career prospects. Eligible professional development costs may include tuition or enrollment fees associated with advanced driver programs, course materials directly relevant to the delivery of the training course, including workbooks or software. Employer applicants will be required to demonstrate that the training aligns with the needs of the business and the employee or future employee's Class 1 driving job. Training that is for personal interest would not be eligible under this stream. Reimbursement or funding under this program is structured as follows. Employers are required to cover 100% of the eligible training costs upfront. Employers can apply for a maximum of $25,000 per eligible employee or future employee, and this can be spread across the 3 funding categories mentioned in the previous slide. All grant activities must be initiated and completed within 90 days of receiving approval. Lastly, it's essential to note that all activities must align with the Government of Alberta's fiscal year, running from April 1st to March 31st. Grant activities that take place after March 31st of the fiscal year the grant application was received will not be eligible for reimbursement. There are 2 instances in which employer applicants will need to submit an application under the program. Firstly, a grant application is required at the beginning, which will help program administration determine which employer applicants have been approved to receive funding for their identified activities. Secondly, approved employers will be required to submit a reimbursement application once approved project activities have been completed and once the employer applicant is ready to be reimbursed. Before applying to the EPG program, it's the employer applicant's responsibility to understand the application and reimbursement requirements. You can feel free to reach out to the program administration team at MNP for any questions related to application. Please note that to determine eligibility, an application must be submitted, as eligibility cannot be determined by phone or email. Applications should be submitted and tracked through the grant portal to ensure all employees confirm their involvement and that everything is completed correctly. Once a decision is made, an email will be sent to the primary contact listed on the application, and decisions can also be viewed in the grant portal. To apply for the grant, employers must review the program guide and familiarize themselves with the eligibility criteria, submit a complete application through the grant portal. Once approved, employers and their employees must complete grant activities within 90 days. After completing activities, submit a reimbursement application within the specified timeframe. Once an approved employer is ready to submit for reimbursement of their completed project activities, they must complete and submit the reimbursement application via the grant portal. Ensure that the application is submitted within 120 days of the grant application approval. Program administration will evaluate the application and inform you of their decision within 30 days. And if the application is approved, funds will be electronically transferred 30 days after the decision is made. Now I'll just walk you through a few screenshots from our grant portal so you can understand the initial steps of using the portal. Once you have created a new profile on the Class 1 Learning Pathway Grant Application portal, you will land at a page that looks like this. Once at this page, you will need to create a new organization before you can begin to prepare an application under the Employment Pathway stream of the grant program. To do so, you would click the New Application button circled here. Once you have created a new organization, you will view the name of your organization in the list below. Should you represent more than one organization that may be eligible for this grant, you are able to create multiple organizations under the same profile. By clicking the name of the organization, you will be taken to the next page where you will be able to open and submit a new application. After selecting the appropriate organization, you will be able to select New Application, circled here, under the Stream 1 Employment Pathway Grant banner to open, save, and eventually submit a new application for your selected organization. A How to Apply video will be forthcoming and will be hosted on our GOA Learning Pathways Grant Program website in the next week. The application guidelines for the EPG program will be available later today on our alberta.ca website displayed here. So it's the alberta.ca/employment pathway grant. Applications under this stream can be accessed and submitted beginning today on April 15th, 2025. Grant applications will be assessed on a first-come, first-served basis. If you have any questions or need assistance, you can feel free to contact our program administration team at the email just at the bottom of the slide again here, programadmin@learningpathwaygrant.ca. I wanted to just take this final opportunity to thank you for attending our webinar today and for your commitment to training and employing Class 1 drivers. We now have some time to go through questions that you might have submitted already through the Q&A or that you have thought about after going through this presentation, and go through any additional questions you might have. I'll now invite Alexandra Bennett to support with answering your questions. So thank you again.
Thank you, Lindsay Ann. So as Lindsay Ann mentioned, my name is Alexandra Bennett, and I am the Acting Director of Strategic Initiatives here in Traffic Safety Services Division. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about the Employment Pathway Grant Program. Please feel free to put them in the chat now, and I will take a look. All right, so someone has asked for a copy of the presentation. I will say that all of the information that's in this presentation is going to be in much greater detail in the applicant guidelines. So I would recommend that you go take a look at those once they are posted. I do know that they are not yet posted, but they will be before the end of the day. All right, so someone has asked, as a future employee, how would you know which driving schools have applied? So this is a good question because I think it speaks a little bit to our previous grant program that we were running. And I would like to clarify that the Employment Pathway Grant is functioning different from the previous grant program. So under the previous grant program, an individual was responsible for applying for the funding and was placed with the driver training school to get their training. Under this new program, an employer will apply on an individual's behalf. So it is up to the individual and the employer to connect to form what we're calling that employment relationship. So essentially either a job offer or a job that you've been onboarded to prior to the employer requesting the funding. So that's how this is going to work. So no longer will the individual be applying for funding on their own behalf. The employer will be applying for funding on the individual's behalf. In terms of which driving schools will be eligible under this program, there is a list of driving schools available on alberta.ca. Any driving school that is a licensed driving school in Alberta and appears on that list will be eligible for the employer to send their employee to for training. All right, so we have another question about the individual's eligibility. So in terms of eligibility, is any Alberta worker eligible, including work permit holders? Yes, so if the individual that the employer is applying on behalf of is able to legally work in Canada, then they would be eligible, they would meet this eligibility criteria, pardon me. There are other eligibility criteria as well that they'll have to meet, but as long as they are legally entitled to work in Canada, then yes, that would fulfill that requirement. All right, so the next question is, do employees need to be registered in a Class 1 training school or, I guess, professional development training before the application is submitted? The answer to that is no. Uh, Employees do not have to be registered prior to the application being submitted. However, the employer does have to have at least a quote from the driver training school that will allow us to assess how much funding will be required, right? So they can be registered prior to the application, but it is not a requirement. I will also state that training can happen before the application is formally approved. However, that is at the employer applicant's own risk because there is, of course, always the potential that the application would be declined. And in that case, the employer is responsible for any monies that they've already put up front for that training. So it is completely up to the applicant if they would like to initiate training prior to submitting the application or prior to the application being approved. However, if the application is denied, then it is the employer's responsibility to cover those funds. All right. The question is, will there be a grant for non-employed people? So the answer to the answer to that is essentially that the individual must be hooked up with an employer and have the commitment from the employer to hire them prior to getting these monies, the grant funding, right? So there is not a grant right now that's targeted at an individual who is just trying to take training on their own. Um, Individuals who are interested in training must connect with an employer who would sponsor them to take this training and apply for this funding. All right, so what is the policy with respect to the grant if the student decides to quit halfway through the program? We sincerely hope that that is not the case. If that is the situation, then the employer can reach out to the program admin at learningpathwaygrant.ca, and we would assess that on a case-by-case basis. The intention, of course, is that the reimbursement would not be the reimbursement would come after the employee receives their Class 1 license and is employed in a Class 1 driving position. So if they're quitting halfway through, that is not the intention of the grant program, right? So we'll assess on a case-by-case basis. So the next question is, will small family businesses who wish to apply for funding for unpaid family labor be eligible? The answer is yes. Small family businesses are very welcome to apply for funding under this grant program. In terms of unpaid family labor, that will be something that you will have to reach out to program admin at learningpathwaygrant.ca just to confirm that that is the case, because in the reimbursement application, it does request for proof of employment, which could constitute things like a T4 or pay stubs. However, if that is not something that you're able to provide because it's unpaid family labor, we will let you know what documentation will be acceptable based on your situation. So the answer to that is yes, please do apply. Okay, so we have a very specific question here about an employee who had to enroll, who has already enrolled and started their training, um, and yeah, and is in the midst of it. And would this person still be eligible for the grant? So I can't speak to that directly here because I don't know anything else about the employee. My recommendation is make an application through the portal, and we will assess based on the information that you provide through that form, whether or not the person would be eligible. Okay, so the next question is, how long is the grant funding going to last for? Um, it's going to be for 2 years for sure, and then we will assess after that. What you would want to be aware of is we are funding it on a year-by-year basis. So we have $10 million worth of funding to apply for this year. And once that $10 million runs out, if we do hit the limit, then there will be no more grant funding for this year until next fiscal year begins. So um, because it is a first come, first served grant, if you are interested in funding an employee, I do recommend that you look at moving forward with that sooner than later. However, the grant application will be open until all of the funding has been allocated. Okay, so the question is, what sorts of courses would qualify for the professional development grant? So the professional development grant is quite open, or and let me specify, it is a funding stream under this grant. Um, the kinds of courses that we are intending to fund under the professional development grant is courses or certifications that a class one driver would need to do either a specific type of class one driving in a specific industry or to generally advance them in their career. So in the portal, there is questions that you will have to fill out as the employer about how this training fits into your business needs and what sort of certification that the employee would receive at the end of it. And that will allow us to assess if the training is eligible under the grant. But essentially what we're looking at is um, if, for example, you're working in an industry where people require a specific certification to be on the job site or to, do that kind of driving, then this was absolutely what that's intended for. Okay, so the next question is, does the student or employer have to pay any amount upfront before applying for the reimbursement or grant? So the answer is yes. The way that it will work is if you're interested, you should apply and submit an initial application. Our grant administrator, MNP, with our direction, with the ministry's direction, will assess that application and let you know if your application is eligible to receive reimbursement or not. If your application is eligible to receive reimbursement, then you would go and pay for the training that you had applied for in that application. So yes, in that case, the employer is required to pay for the training upfront. Once the training has been completed, then the employer would submit a reimbursement application and they would then receive, so long as everything has remained the same from the initial application to the reimbursement application, at that time, you could be eligible for the reimbursement. I would also like to clarify, I said after training, but the way the grant is structured, the individual is required to be employed for at least some period of time before the reimbursement before the employer would be eligible for the reimbursement. So you would train the person, employ them, and then apply for the reimbursement. All right, so we're asking for a further definition of an established employer relationship with the individual. So let me pull up my exact wording, but essentially what we're looking for is a commitment between the employer and the individual that there is a job or an employee, like a class one learning job there. So let me just pull that up. Okay. So an employment relationship can be defined a couple of ways. Of course, if an employer wishes to employ this individual off the hop, that's fantastic. If the person is currently employed with the employer, that would be considered an employment relationship. If the employer is not prepared to employ the individual until they have received their license, for example, then an offer of conditional employment could also be considered an employment relationship. A third option for establishing an employment relationship would be an offer of unconditional employment. So there will be employment that you can have starting from this date. It's not necessarily conditional on the licensure. All of this, of course, will be very clearly laid out in those guidelines, which will be posted on the website today. All right, the next question is, can an employer include several employee names on the application? The answer is yes. So there's a couple of ways that this will work. One, if all of your employees are going to be taking the exact same training at the exact same time, the portal will allow you to add multiple people's names and information under one form, essentially, one application. So you could go about it that way. If the employees are going to be taking the training at different times, or if they're taking different trainings, for example, one person's taking the class 1 training and one person is taking professional development training, you can still apply for them. However, in the portal, you will have to submit 2 separate applications, one for each training course, essentially. But yes, either way, you can still apply for them at the same time. All right, how long would it take approximately from applying for the grant to find out if you are eligible for it? So we are aiming to have the maximum time for this eligibility assessment to take 2 weeks. Ideally, it will take less time than that, and in most cases, I'm hoping that to be the case, but the absolute maximum time would be 2 weeks for us to let you know whether or not you're eligible. Okay, so the question is, will the employment pathway grant be replacing the Canada Alberta Job Grant, or do we know what's occurring with the Canada Alberta Job Grant in 2025? So no, this program is not intended to replace the Canada Alberta Job Grant. For those of you that are familiar with it, you may recognize that there are many similarities between this program and the Canada Alberta Job Grant, but it's not intended to replace the Canada Alberta Job Grant. The Canada Alberta Job Grant is administered by the Ministry of Jobs, Economy and Trade. So I'm unable to speak more specifically about what's going on with the Canada Alberta Job Grant. At this time, it is paused and it remains paused. All right, this is a longer question, so I'm just going to take a moment to read it here. Okay. So this person's asking, part of the criteria is that the employee needs to be an Alberta resident. Some companies have commuter programs. Will they be able to take advantage of the grant for those that work in Alberta but live elsewhere? And then there's a second question, but I'll just wait and answer the first one first. So the intention is that this program is targeted to residents of Alberta. So as of right now, individuals that do not live in Alberta would not be eligible for funding under this program. If this is a significant issue for your business, please do email program admin at learningpathway.ca to let us know what your program is, and we can look at that for future iterations. But at this time, they would not be eligible. Okay, and the second question, part of this question is there a risk if an employee moves from Alberta but is still employed after the training is completed that the grant could be revoked? So I think I'm understanding that to mean if the person begins their training and the program as a resident of Alberta, but within the training, they move outside of Alberta, but they remain employed with the employer. I think that would be one of those case-by-case basis situations that we would have to review and see what's going on. Of course, the intention is that the program is targeted to Alberta residents, but that they remain employed, right? So I think in this case, if the person was still employed, that's definitely something that we could consider, but I can't make a 100% confirmation on the call live right now. All right, next question is, once an employer has been approved for the grant, is there a deadline to begin training? So yes, we don't want this to take up all of your time, of course, and we want to be able to administer the program effectively. So the intention is that the training must be started and completed within 90 days of you receiving the approval of your initial application. Okay, the next question is, can an employer that has their own driving school hire a class 5 driver and apply for grant funding? So, a couple of things here. First, one of the criteria is that the employer has a class 1 driving position available for the driver. So, if someone's intending to hire someone to a class 5 driving position, that would not be eligible under the grant program. They would require a class 1 driving position. The second part of that question is, if an employer intends to train the employee as a class 1 driver, they are not able to train them in-house if they do have their own driving school. So you cannot apply for the grant to pay you to train your own employees as a driving school. If you want to apply for the grant and send someone to train elsewhere, then that could potentially be eligible. So the question is, what if an employee has become licensed, or an individual has become licensed and the reimbursement is received, but the employee refuses to work for 90 days? Okay, so after licensing has been done, if it's for class 1 training, class 1 training and licensing, the employee must be retained in a class 1 driving position for at least 30 days in order to be eligible for that reimbursement. It's 90 days for the onboarding and 90 days for the professional development. If they do not stay for that period, it is not intended that that would be eligible under the program. However, like I said, if that's the case, please reach out to the program admin email that I've mentioned a couple of times, and we'll assess on a case-by-case situation. But of course, the intention is that the employers will be connecting with individuals who they know are quite committed to the industry. Of course, we understand that things happen in people's lives. You know, things happen and their spouse moves away and they follow them, or other things like that. So the intention of this program is not to penalize employers where situations like that have happened. However, we want to be very clear that the intention of the program is to hire is to support employers to hire new class 1 drivers. So we really want to make sure that that's happening and that every effort is made for that to occur. But of course, many things happen in this life that we don't have any control over, so we don't intend to penalize people for that. Okay, so the next question is that this program is intended for class 1 only, not for class 3 or air brakes. So uh, that's partially correct. So this funding is intended to train people in class 1 training, so it would not be funding class 3 training. However, if an individual requires their air brakes as part of that class 1 training, then air brakes is eligible under this grant. So if the person has had his or her class 1 for more than 2 years, do they still qualify for more training? So the answer to that is yes, they could still qualify for the professional development training, but well, obviously they wouldn't qualify for class 1 driver training, they wouldn't need it, and they would not qualify for the onboarding incentive in that case. All right, those are some great questions. I'll just let you percolate and think on that a little bit. Please pop any more questions that you may have into that Q&A. Great question. Okay, so this question is, what can the incentive for onboarding new drivers be used for? Training costs only or to supplement salary of the new hire? So we have intentionally left the onboarding incentive to be discretionary to the employer's requirements. Um, we understand that there are many costs associated with hiring and onboarding a new Class 1 driver. So really what we're looking for is that the 90 days minimum employment has occurred in this case. Uh, it is up to the employer if they want to use that for training, other training that's not eligible under this grant, or if they would prefer to use it for salary supplementation or a hiring bonus or whatever they would like to do in that case. Um, that is up to the discretion of the employer as long as the person has less than 2 years of driving, Class 1 driving, and has been hired into a Class 1 driving position for at least 90 days. So the question is, would training completed with the use of a training simulator be eligible? So in terms of Class 1 training, it would have to be training that's provided at, like I said, at one of the licensed Class 1 driver training schools located in the province. Um, if they're using a simulator, potentially that could be eligible. If it's other training, like professional development training outside of the simulator, again, or excuse me, not outside of the simulator, outside of the Class 1 training, we would be looking at you to fill in what the training is, what the certification is, and what instructional hours are associated with that, and how it relates to your business and your ability to do your business and the ability of the employee to work and progress in their careers within your business. So um, potentially, potentially it could be eligible. I cannot make a for sure determination over the call, Ken, because I don't know what specific training that is or any of the other details. Good question. Okay, so this next question is, will employers be able to access each sub-streams of funding independently? For example, if an employer hires a new driver that already received their Class 1 driver's license independently, can employers access the onboarding funding without accessing the pathway license funding? The answer is yes, absolutely. This is intended to be a flexible grant program. So if you have someone who's come to you already with a Class 1 license with less than 2 years of driving experience, or less than 2 years, sorry, a Class 1 license for less than 2 years, then they could be eligible potentially for the onboarding and professional development, and you wouldn't have to apply for the Class 1 training. So, correct. Okay. So the question is, if an employer has an in-house training or certification program for professional development, is the employer cost eligible for reimbursement of that professional development? An example would be tank truck, uh, such as what a tank truck company would complete. So right now, the employer has to be distinct from the trainer in order to be eligible. Uh, if this is a great concern to you, like I said, please email that program admin at learningpathway.ca address and we'll take a look at it. But as the way the program is structured right now, the employer must be separate and distinct from the organization providing the training. Alrighty, so this question asks, what happens if a student can't complete a road test within that 90-day period because of examiner availability? Will that affect the ability of the employer to get reimbursement? So again, the intention is that we're not sitting and waiting on training and having it last a long time. I'm sure you all want your employees and future employees to get to work right away, so that the intention is to show that there is a bit of a timeline on this and get folks moving through their training as quickly as they can. Um, if you run into this situation as early as you see this coming, please shoot an email to that program admin email, and we'll assess and see what we can do. Again, the intention of this program is to facilitate folks getting into class one driving jobs and to move through that process as quickly and efficiently as they can. It's not meant to be punitive. So, like if things are outside of your control happening, absolutely shoot an email and we'll see what we can do. That said, um, you know, don't don't I guess delay on this front. All right, so the question is that this employer or this person's experience is that they had to travel 5 hours to training school, which made the schedule being fragmented and also sorry, let me say that again. The experience is that we had previously had to travel 5 hours to a training school, and the schedule ended up fragmented, thus incurring significantly more traveling costs. Will overage costs be covered, or will it be case by case? So under this grant program, travel is not specifically funded. So the class one um, training is based, or the funding for the class one training is based on the quote provided by the driver training school. So we are paying for the training specifically and not travel. That said, there is nothing that would prevent an employer from using the onboarding incentive monies to cover travel if that was required. But specifically, the training costs do not include travel time or travel costs. All right, so someone else has asked approximately how long from the time applying for a grant will it take to find out if you are eligible? So our goal is to have those eligibility assessments completed within 2 weeks of application. If it can be done faster, absolutely it would be, but 2 weeks would be the maximum time that we are aiming for. Okay, so this question is, can a post-secondary institution apply for the grant to train a new class one instructor? So the intention of the grant is to facilitate people to come or to work in class one driving positions. So I think that would be where you would get caught up. The intention is not to fund people to be trained to instructional positions. So someone has another question about if a carrier has a subsidiary class one training facility, the schools would not be eligible. So the training school must be separate and distinct from the employer. Um, those uh, training schools, I mean, I'm not sure what your setup is, but could potentially train other organizations' employees if that's something that you do. So when does the 90-day time frame start? It starts from when the approval decision is communicated to you. All right, so this person's asking, as a potential employee, do you look for a driving school or company who is hiring? So the best bet would be to look for a company, not the school. So the school is going to be hired by or contracted by the company to provide the training, but they will not be hiring you directly, and the school will not be applying on your behalf for the funding. So pardon me, I said the school will not be hiring you directly. I may have misspoken. There could be a school out there that has a class one driving position and they may hire you. That's a separate situation. But in general, you're going to be looking for an employer who is hiring for a class one driving position, and that employer could apply on your behalf for this funding. I will say too, the other grant stream under this same program called the Industry Advancement Grant, which we just had a webinar on yesterday, which is also live, will provide funding to organizations who are facilitating or who are doing projects that will help people become employed, attracted, retained in the industry. So Pardon me, there very well may be in the future a program under that stream that would facilitate this kind of connection. Um, so that's something to look out for as well. Okay, so this person asks, I've recently put a few drivers through the MELT program and they are just finishing up. Do they qualify or is it only for new applicants, excuse me. The intention is that this is for new applicants. So this question is, how do I determine if our company is considered a commercial carrier under the program parameters? So I'm going to direct you to our website, which will have the grant guidelines posted. In the grant guidelines, there is a detailed description of eligibility criteria for an organization. That that is that will be how you will assess whether you are eligible or not. So you'll need to meet those eligibility criteria, and it does discuss, how your company could be registered, for example, in Alberta. That will help you to assess this. And then, of course, you will be required to have a Class 1 driving position available for that individual. Okay, so this question is upgrading from Class 3 to Class 1 considered professional development? So, a couple of things here. One, under the Class 1 training um, substream of funding, the experience and equivalency program is eligible. So if you're an individual with your Class 3 license that qualifies for the experience and equivalency program, your employer, or if you're an employer with someone who qualifies for the experience and equivalency program, you could apply to have them trained and supported through that way. Otherwise, the professional development substream is intended for individuals who already have their Class 1 license and are getting further certifications. So it wouldn't be eligible under professional development, but depending on the situation of your Class 3 driver, you could absolutely either go through the E&E program if they are eligible for that, or potentially even just go through the full Class 1 learning pathway program if they do not meet the E&E requirements. So that's more likely what you'll be looking at rather than the professional development stream of things. All right, can the professional development be used for instructor training? Example, air brake instructor. Um, Potentially. I mean, the intention of the professional development is to advance a Class 1 driver in their career. Now, a requirement of the professional development funding stream is that the individual who gets that or who does the training has a Class 1 driving position available to them for 90 days post-training. So if you're looking at putting someone in an instructor position afterwards, that is where you could get tripped up a little bit. However, if it is required for your business to have someone with that credentials, we can definitely look at it. It will get a bit tricky. Like I said, this program is definitely intended overall to put people into Class 1 driving positions. So bear that in mind when you're considering what you might like to apply for. Okay. So now we're getting into some specific certificates such as first aid, CSO, etc., for an extra 1 to 2 months training on the job. So again, the intention of professional development is to be reasonably open to training that is required by the industry for Class 1 drivers to advance in their career, to hold a Class 1 driving position, etc. So if those certificates are required, they certainly would be considered under the grant program. Of course, I'm not able to make a determination live here today, but by all means, apply. All right, so I also understand that we're getting a lot of questions on, where the webinars or other resources will be located. They will all be located on the alberta.ca employment pathway grant page. So you can go take a look for those resources after our call. So the guidelines will be posted today, and any additional resources will be posted in the coming weeks. All right, I've been really appreciating all of these questions, and I'm quite happy to hear all the enthusiasm there is for this program. I'll give it a minute for any other questions to come in. Hmm. Okay, so this person has tried to log into the portal and it says that their email is being used, but they cannot reset the password. So I'm going to ask you to email this program admin at learningpathwaygrant.ca and let them know what's going on. And I'll flag this for my MNP colleagues on the call to watch out for that email as well. I'm sorry, I can't speak to what's happening with the grant specifically in this case, or the portal, excuse me, in this case. I would also mention too, sorry, before I continue on, just troubleshooting here, maybe checking your junk folder as well for that reset email. That often is where those pesky emails end up. Okay. This person is saying that the grants portal is asking for the Alberta corporate number. This person's corporate access number is 9 digits, but the form wants 10 digits and it's preventing them from registering. Again, I'll flag that for my MNP colleagues on the call, and if you would please email with a few more details and perhaps even a screenshot to that program admin at learningpathway.ca, we'll take a look into it. Okay, so this question is it the employee who pays for the training and then be eligible for the funding? So the answer to that is no. The employer is the one who needs to pay for any training and get reimbursed. The employee is not the person who will be paying for the training in this situation. The only exception to that is under the new learning pathway, the entry training costs $250, and that is at the discretion of the employer, whether the employer will pay for that or the employee will pay for that. That specific $250 is not eligible for reimbursement under the grant program, so it's between the employer and the employee who will pay for that entry training. If now I'm getting a bit in the weeds, if the employee requires support from a driver training school to complete the entry training, that additional support would be funded under this grant, or could be funded under this grant. But specifically, the cost of registering for the entry training, which is $250, is not eligible under this grant. Thank you. I'm seeing some positive comments in the Q&As, and I do appreciate that. We're quite excited about this initiative. All right, so the next question here is, could I give an overview of the onboarding incentive? Certainly. So the onboarding incentive is up to a maximum of $10,000 per individual. And it's intended to support the employer with the costs of onboarding and hiring a new Class 1 driver into a Class 1 driving position. So for the onboarding incentive, you must have a Class 1 driving position available to that person, and you must employ them for a full 90 days in that position, ideally longer, but at minimum of 90 days before you would be eligible for the onboarding incentive. So this substream of the funding is the most flexible. We do not specify specifically what you must spend that money on. We appreciate that there are multiple costs associated with onboarding a new employee, so it is at the employer's discretion what they will spend those funds on. But once again, it is a reimbursement grant, so you must have hired and employed the person for 90 days before you would become eligible for those funds. I will make one more comment about that as well. The individual can only, so how am I going to say this? An employer can receive onboarding funds for an individual only once. If that individual leaves and goes to another employer, the second employer will not be eligible for onboarding funding for that individual. So it is also tied to the person as well. When you submit your initial application for eligibility assessment, that would be when we would advise you if that's the case. So we have a question here about what driving schools are supported for this funding. So the answer is there is a list of any licensed driving school that provides Class 1 training in Alberta would be eligible under this funding. So there is a list that's linked in the applicant guidelines. It's also available on alberta.ca. So that's where you could find out where the nearest or the best training school for you is going to be located. Okay, so this person is asking if an employer can put into an agreement with their employee that they have to reimburse the employer for funding if they decide to terminate ahead of the 90 days before the employer could be reimbursed. So the intention is that the employer pays for this funding, not the employee. Like I said, the intention is not for the Ministry of Transportation and Economic Corridors to be really punitive about this. Like I said, things happen in people's lives, and we're aware of that. We will be assessing on a case-by-case basis, and I can't make a blanket statement that if people are leaving their jobs before that 90 days, that will be eligible. So I can't commit to that. However, understand that this is intended to be a program that gets people into jobs and keeps them there. So that's what we're driving towards. We don't, like I said, we want to understand that people's lives sometimes take them in other directions too, though. So, okay. So the question is, how, in terms of the employment that is required for reimbursement, either 30 or 90 days, does that have to be in a row or is it throughout the year? So no, it's consecutive. Okay, so this person asks, once someone who has a class 5 is hired, is it acceptable to apply for the grant and send him or her for training courses and onboarding right away? Or do we have to wait to hear back whether we are approved or not? The person will need the training either way. So it's absolutely up to the employer applicant how they want to approach this. If you would like the guarantee of knowing that um, you have been approved for the funding before you send them over to training, then just wait for that assessment to be completed and the results to be communicated to you. If you are happy to take the chance that the funding, you may not be eligible for the funding or the funding may be denied for whatever reason, then you can absolutely send the person for training before you hear back about the eligibility. Um, just know that, if you send someone for training, you've already paid for it, and then you make the application after, or you send them before you've heard whether or not you're eligible, you are still required to pay those funds, obviously, and the government wouldn't be covering it. So that is the risk that you would run. But if you're comfortable with that risk, and like this person has said, if the person needs the training either way and you've committed to hiring them, then no, you don't have to wait. It's just a slightly riskier way of going about things. All right, it seems that someone may be struggling with the email address. I just want to, you know what I'm going to do actually? I'm going to post it for you. It is a long email address, so I'm suspecting that there may possibly just be a little typo in there. As far as I know, the email address is functioning. I know we're getting lots of emails in. I've sent an email to it myself. So perhaps there's just a little typo. So I'm just going to put it in here. Let me do this. All right, so my computer's just thinking about it, but I've gone and posted the email address, so you should be able to see it in the Q&A. If you copy and paste that, hopefully that will solve your problem. All right, so this person is asking, is it up to the employer to ask for any upfront security deposit from the employee just in case the person refuses to complete the training or work? So the government's not going to get involved in how the employer decides to run their business or assess the compatibility, I guess I'll say, of a future employee. The intention, of course, is that the employer pays for the training and is reimbursed the cost. The employee should not be paying for the training. That's not the intention of this program. So I will leave it at that. All right, I'm just scrolling through the Q&A here. It looks like we've made it through all of the questions. We have a little bit of time here. I will happily sit for another minute or two to see if there are any other questions that come in before I move things forward. All right, I'll give it one more minute. And thank you again for your time today and all of these questions. It's been really excellent getting to hear them all and answer them for you. All right, I am not seeing any more questions come in. Um, Once again, I want to thank everyone who's taken the time to attend the call today and who's expressed interest in this program. As I mentioned, the portal and the guidelines are going to be up on the website before the end of the day, so please do take a look there. And once you read through the guidelines, if you have any other additional questions, that program admin email address is going to be your place to go for any future questions. Um, yeah, like I said, thank you so very much for your time and have a lovely rest of your afternoon. Take care.